Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is a monthly check-in for the North Central Climate Science Center. As we kind of worked out over the summer, going back to some of the science talks to give a half hour, and then we'll have a little bit of question and answer, and then go around the table. These meetings are for essentially funded investigators or other interested stakeholders. It's a chance for the funded investigators to report on kind of what they're doing. We've developed a spreadsheet that kind of they report on. I see that most people did fill that out. I appreciate that. And then focusing the conversation on the second half of the meeting to be the foundational science areas and the needs from the funded management focus projects on the foundational science areas. And I saw a couple of questions in there that we can go through. To start off the meeting, I'm excited that we have Molly Cross from Wildlife Conservation Society is going to be talking about some of the programs they have there. They've got a lot going on. I think it's a really interesting partnership between the Climate Science Centers, which are kind of taking from academics and more of the research side and bringing it into adaptation mitigation plans. And some of the stuff Wildlife Conservation Society is doing is more boots on the ground, so to speak, and bring it into real action. So it's a nice kind of partnership, I think. We also have used Wildlife Conservation Society and their contribution to the training as far as the scanning the conservation horizons and the climate smart conservation. So all in all, really exciting to have this talk from Molly. Maybe without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Molly, and you can tell us some of the stuff you guys are up to and think about some of these collaborative ideas.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to present to the Climate Science Center community. And as Jeff mentioned, I'm a Climate Change Adaptation Coordinator for WCS. I work within our North America program, so I work actually on adaptation issues across a number of different landscapes in the U.S. and Canada, including a program that we have here in the Greater Yellowstone and Northern Rockies. So I do a lot of work in this region as well on climate change adaptation. And WCS's climate adaptation work spans the gamut from doing scientific research on the impacts of climate change on particular wildlife and ecosystems in the landscapes where we work. We also do a lot of facilitation of adaptation planning and helping natural resource managers and conservation practitioners think about their goals and their actions in the face of climate change. And then we do in a variety of ways, we work with partners to help implement priority adaptation strategies that come out of those planning efforts. But what I want to talk about here today is a specific program that we have really had a great, fortunate opportunity to be able to run in the last couple of years. It's a ReGrant program. It's funded generously by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. They give WCS funding, which we then give back out in the form of grants to conservation organizations that are implementing on-the-ground adaptation projects. And what I'm going to spend a lot of time in this presentation talking about the specific niche, the specific kinds of projects that we're looking to support through our grant program. But what I'm hoping to do with this presentation is to do two things. Some of you on the call may be practitioners who have projects where you are implementing adaptation strategies on the ground and maybe potential applicants to the grant program. So part of my intent with the presentation is to share with you all a deeper understanding of the fund so that you might be interested in applying to the program. For those of you on the call who are scientists that are doing scientific research on climate change impacts, or maybe getting more involved in thinking about adaptation planning, my hope is that by giving you all as detailed a sketch as possible of our grant program and the kinds of projects that we're looking to support, that it'll help you guys be be the best service providers and expertise providers you can be to the conservation organizations that may be interested in developing adaptation projects and that they could then seek funding for through our grant program. So we've done this with some other groups, kind of like the Climate Science Centers, folks that do provide vulnerability assessments and adaptation planning support. And it's really helped us generate a stronger pool of projects coming into our grant program. So what I wanted to do in the presentation is, again, give you guys an introduction to the Climate Adaptation Fund program and the specific niche of adaptation work that we are looking to support with our fund dollars. And then at the end, I'll sort of circle around a little bit to what I see as some of the major opportunities for partnering with the North Central Climate Science Center on adaptation work going forward. So I don't think, let's see, sorry, there. I know I don't need to say a lot to this audience about the fact that climate change is already having significant effects on wildlife and ecosystems, whether it's mismatches in ecology, along Yellowville in the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone, who obviously has not yet changed coat color, even though the snow has melted out earlier this year, or species distributions and species interactions. This is a red fox that is not usually found in the Arctic, preying upon an Arctic fox. And so we're again seeing shifts in species ranges, which lead to changes in species interactions. Or whether it's change in outbreaks of diseases, pests, pathogens, effects on economically important fish and wildlife communities and their habitats, such as some of the impacts we're seeing on cold water fish species in the region. There's no question that there are many different ways that climate change is already affecting wildlife and ecosystems, and the projections for the future are, of course, for bigger changes. And so while there's been a real surgence of focus on scientific research on climate change and a growing amount of attention paid to sort of plan for those impacts, we still continue to see, and a lot of researchers continue to see, a sort of lag in the actual implementation of climate-informed conservation strategy on the ground. And it's sort of in this context that we really decided to develop the WCS Climate Adaptation Fund in partnership with the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation to really try to catalyze on-the-ground actions for adaptation and try and really boost the amount of implementation that we're seeing. And so the fund is trying to really incentivize this new way of doing business. And what I mean by that is a new way of thinking about our conservation work in the context of changing times, and specifically changing climate, so that hopefully we can try to create a paradigm shift within the conservation community where more and more people are thinking about their work not in the context of stationarity, but in the context of what may be very uncertain, but no doubt changing climate and other environmental conditions going forward. So a couple of sort of basic facts about the grant program. We've given out over $7.5 million between 2011 and 2014, so in the first 4 years of the program. And that money has been invested into 41 different applied, on-the-ground adaptation projects that we feel are really designed to address climate impacts specifically. And we see these projects as really ambassadors of what applied climate adaptation for wildlife and ecosystems actually looks like on the ground, because I think it's still kind of a black box for a lot of us as we think about, well, what does adaptation really mean? What does it look like? And so what we're trying to do with this grant program is to provide models for what it can like, how it, what it looks like in terms of relying on the best available science and doing structured and rigorous planning to develop on-the-ground implementation projects that can sort of inspire others to be thinking about these issues as well. And I'll talk a little bit later about the importance of communications and outreach within our grant program. So I want to highlight sort of 6 key factors that help to define the niche of projects that we're looking to support through our grant program. And I've listed them here. I'll sort of read through the list, but then I'm going to say a little bit about each one in turn going forward. So we really are looking for projects that have climate adaptation as a core goal. So while there's a lot of really important conservation work to be done out there in the world, we're specifically trying to find those projects that are really taking on the challenge of tailoring their project goals and actions to address climate change impacts specifically. And we're really, like I said earlier, really trying to kind of pilot on-the-ground implementation and really focus on the implementation part of the equation. We focus on projects that are about protecting ecosystem functionality. We're less interested in projects that are just trying to impact a single species. We have a bit of a bias. I mean, this is not a black and white issue, but we have a bias for projects that are more looking forward to changes, managing for change and in the context of change, rather than projects that are really trying to resist change, especially when resistance is potentially unlikely to be successful in the long run. And then ultimately, we're trying to make sustainable landscape investments, and I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by that. And ultimately, projects that we think really help us communicate a model or models to really try and inspire others to be tackling this challenging issue of climate change in their work. So again, I'm going to go through each of these in turn and say a little bit more. The first is, again, about projects that are really designed with climate adaptation as a core goal or outcome. And I think this is a piece that, in particular, is at that interface of the science and planning work that the North Central Climate Science Center are really pioneering right now. Because what we really are looking for projects to do in their proposals as they communicate how they see their project as being an adaptation project, we're looking for them to clearly and transparently spell out what the implications of climate change are for achieving their current goals with their current actions, and then lay out, therefore, the project is designed to try and better address those impacts. Really want to see folks be able to clearly connect the dots, which is a phrase I like to use a lot, between what are the climate impacts of your system, what are the actions that you're proposing to do, and what do you expect to be the long-term adaptation outcomes of taking those actions as the ecosystem experiences these climate change impacts. And in some cases, the connecting may be fairly easy, like this, you can probably guess it's going to be a polar bear once you connect all those dots, sort of more like the kind of connect the dots that my 4-year-old might do. But in some cases, the connecting the dots might be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated. And so this is a place where, again, I think there's a real opportunity for us to be better partnering between the climate science community and the sort of folks that decision support and the practitioners on the ground to really be able to pull all these pieces together and strongly connect those dots. So I wanted to provide an example of what I mean by connecting the dots in a way that, that I find to be fairly compelling in talking about a conservation project as an adaptation project. And I'll do it by also providing at least one example here, one of the projects that we're funding with our grant. And this is the project work in Indiana Oak Woodlands, and it's run by the Nature Conservancy. And what I want to talk about how they've really been able to clearly and compellingly link the vulnerabilities and impacts that the system is facing, the most important vulnerabilities and impacts facing the system, with their proposed actions towards the end of achieving long-term adaptation outcomes. In these forests, they're very concerned about warmer temperatures and decreased precipitation, leading to more severe drought stress. And it's also, those impacts are coming on a system which has already been impacted by past forest management, which has in the past favored those tree species that actually prefer moist conditions. So the system has been managed in a way that is setting it up to be especially vulnerable to increases in drought that they project for the future. So that's sort of their drive turn for these forest systems. The actions that they're proposing relate to thinning and removing tree species that prefer those moist conditions. So trying to get rid of those more music-loving species. And then they're also going to increase the number of canopy openings to improve light penetration to the forest floor, and they're going to then be applying prescribed fire. Now, if you were just to look at those lists of proposed actions, there's nothing about those actions that in and of themselves articulate that this is a climate change informed project. And so this is why the actions themselves, in my mind, are not adaptation actions or not adaptation actions. What's really important to see is the full thought process of how they think taking these actions is going to lead to adaptation-related outcomes in the longer term. And so the way that they're looking at their project is that they're looking at these actions and expect these actions to increase the complexity and variability within the understory and canopy in a way that's going to lead to increased recruitment of drought-tolerant oaks and herbaceous cover. So again, they're really trying to shift from these more moist-loving species to the more drought-tolerant species, so that these forests will hopefully continue to provide nesting and forage habitat for forest birds and mammal species, even as droughts increase with climate change. So it's that piece that really talks about why these actions are leading to outcomes in the context of climate change that we are looking for applicants to our program to be able to clearly articulate. So the next point I wanted to talk about is how we're really trying to really boost examples of that sort of implementation part of the science, planning, and then taking action sort of part of the cycle. And so we do not support with our grant dollars any scientific research or the adaptation planning that is often needed to design projects in a climate change context. So while we don't support those efforts, we are very much looking to projects that have tapped into the best available science research and done some form of structured planning, whether it's formal or informal, to think about the climate science information in the context of their conservation work. So while we don't fund that work with our dollars, we are looking for projects that have tapped into those resources. And so again, that's where, again, I think the climate science centers are really leading on research, and my understanding is they're also investing, at least to some degree, in the planning. And so those are the kinds of projects that have gone through that process that we really want to see coming then into our grant program to actually implement the strategies that come out of that planning. I did want to flag that we do allow for, within our grant program, applicants to ask for funding to support monitoring and evaluation so that they can test the action effectiveness into the future. And so that, to the extent that that is also a form of research, we do allow for applicants to include some dollars to go towards monitoring and evaluation. Although we can talk more about that if people are interested, but we recognize that we are not going to be adequately supporting a full monitoring and evaluation program, but we do allow some of our dollars to be used towards that end. The third point is that we want to sort of focus on projects that are about ecological function rather than about benefiting single species. And so just one project that provides an example of this kind of emphasis is a project in the Methow Valley in Washington State, the Beaver Reintroduction Project, where they are bringing beaver back into the landscape to try and recover some of the natural sponge effect of these watersheds. As high elevation snowpacks are projected to decline and already showing some signs of declining, they are investing in sort of beaver activities on the landscape with the hope that they can boost the natural water storage capacity, or what I like to call the sponge effect of these watersheds, in a way that might at least partially offset the storage of water in snowpacks, so that later on in the summer season, as temperatures warm, these wetland areas created by the beaver are returning more water back into the streams. So this is the kinds of projects that we are really trying to invest in, more so than a project that's just tailored to provide benefits to one single species. So the next point is that this is one where, again, it's a little hard to be completely black or white on this, but we are a little bit more interested in projects that are about managing ecosystems to enhance resilience or even facilitate transitions in the face of climate change than those that are proposing actions that are really about resisting change that may ultimately be inevitable, or trying to restore to historic conditions that are not likely to persist under future climate conditions. So again, we're really looking for those projects that are looking ahead to expected future conditions and making reasonable assumptions about what the system might look like, and therefore what might be reasonably achievable goals in the longer term as climate changes. So an example of a project more in that kind of facilitating or embracing and shaping change kind of end of the spectrum is a project we are funding in Minnesota. The Nature Conservancy in Minnesota has been running a project that they call an adaptation forestry project, where they're concerned about these forests, which are sort of more northerly forests, which are projected to lose some of their more northern species as climate warms. And they're worried about these areas transitioning to basically non-forested habitat as climate changes. And so what they're trying to do is see if they can intervene and shape some of those changes in a way that keeps the system ultimately as a forest, at least for as long as possible. And so these are working forests, and so they are harvested on rotations. And after harvesting, they do replant those areas. And in the past, they would have focused on some of these pine and spruce species, but now they're starting to fiddle with that planting list, and they're boosting the representation of some of those species that are already in the system today, but maybe less common, but that are projected to do better under the future climate conditions in this region. And they're starting to downplay or de-emphasize some of those species that they think are going to have a really hard time persisting into the future. And so this is much more of an interventionist type approach to thinking about their conservation work, but they're decided to try and experiment with these strategies to see if they can, again, shape the future of these forests in a way that's informed by climate change information. So the next point, again, is we're looking to make sustainable landscape scale investments in conservation. And so that means that we tend to shy away from focusing on the most vulnerable systems, again, perhaps ones that may have a very difficult time at least persisting in that place where the work is supposed to be done, or that are sort of temporary Band-Aid measures that may not really be able to be sustainable into the long term, or maybe require lots and lots of investment every single year to be able to be successful. We shy away from those projects and are more interested in projects that are looking at sort of those places that are going to be the long-term strongholds, or the refugia, or places or systems that are likely to persist as climate changes. So an example of that comes from a project that we're funding about conserving cold water refugia in West Virginia and Virginia. And this is a project led by Trout Unlimited. And it is certainly focused to some degree on the different trout fish species that live in these streams, but they're also looking more broadly at other aquatic species that require these colder habitats to survive. And so rather than, in a lot of ways, if you look at these pictures, they're doing the kind of stream restoration work that Trout Unlimited has always done. And so what about this project is climate informed? Well, what's climate informed is that they've done very detailed assessments and analyses and research to look at the different stream reaches and find those places that they think are most likely to stay cold enough, long enough into the future, even as climate changes. And so it's where they're investing their dollars in restoration that's informed by climate change. And some of the strategies, like boosting riparian vegetation, are intended to shade streams in a way that, again, they hope can actually buffer against some of the impacts of climate change. So in this case, the actions they're taking are very common for a group like Trout Unlimited to be taking, but they're trying to be very strategic and use climate information to drive where they focus those investments in West Virginia and Virginia. And so then the last point I wanted to talk about in terms of sort of the niche we're trying to support is we also are looking for projects that have really clear ways of trying to stand themselves up as a model and communicate the learning that they're doing through the project. And so we're often investing in projects that are demonstrating adaptation practices, sometimes at a relatively small spatial scale, but that there are practices that they hope can be adopted more broadly in other locations and replicated across a larger landscape. And so we're looking for activities and expect projects to include activities and ask us for funding for those activities that involve them sharing their lessons that they're learning, sharing their successes and their challenges that they face in trying to do this adaptation work, and to try and encourage other practitioners to consider adopting similar practices. So that sort of provides kind of a big sketch of trying to articulate the real niche that we're looking to support. In terms of kind of a couple of the key details on who can apply to the grant program and how the process works, eligible applicants are only nonprofit conservation organizations. So that does not include state or federal government agencies or universities. But we really do strongly encourage public-private partnerships. We are funding a number of projects that are being implemented on Forest Service lands, on fish and wildlife refuges. And so even though it has to be a nonprofit conservation group that applies and gets the funding, they can pass funding on to agencies and support the time and effort and certainly the on-the-ground implementation work that happens on public lands. Projects do need to be in the United States, and the maximum request amount is $250,000, but we do require a one-to-one match. So if you ask for more, you obviously need to have more match to be able to offer up. We have been able to, in the last couple of years, offer some waivers of that one-to-one match on a case-by-case basis. This is in particular so we can try to encourage potentially more risky or innovative projects that may not yet have that match funding in hand because they're new ideas. So that's something that can be considered. In terms of what sort of applying to the grant program looks like in terms of the timeline, we are right now reviewing our full proposals for the 2015 cycle, so that cycle is closed. But we will be offering another round of grants in 2016. And usually the RFP and an associated guidance document that lays out a lot of what I've just shared with you in terms of what kinds of projects we're looking for is usually released in February and pre-proposals are due 6 weeks later, and then we review those pre-proposals and offer up a more limited number of invitations to submit full proposals, usually around May, so that the full proposals are due in the middle of the summer and decisions are made in the early to mid-fall. So just so in terms of the next call for proposals, you definitely want to be keeping your eyes peeled early in 2016 for that information. Our RFP has not changed dramatically from year to year, nor has our guidance document, but we do tweak it a little bit each year. And so it's always important to read those very closely when you're considering applying. It's not necessarily, past RFPs are not necessarily indicative of exactly what we might be asking for in any given year. So one of the ways that we've been trying to help boost the pool of strong adaptation projects that are out there in the U.S. so that we hopefully have a pool of strong projects that are coming in the door and requesting funding through the grant program is by doing trainings and helping groups actually do that planning in a way that we think really sets them up strongly to talk about their projects in an adaptation context. And so in 2014, we offered 2 of these training sessions that are really 2-day workshops that are really what we call hands-on coaching sessions. So there's a number of instructors, usually one instructor for every 2 groups that comes to the meeting. Sometimes it's individuals, but we really encourage whole project teams or small project teams to come to the training with their real-world conservation projects that they're working on and that they want to look at through the lens of climate change. And there are some short presentations on concepts, but most of the time is spent in hands-on working sessions where we help coach them through the adaptation planning process in a 2-day framework. We have 2 scheduled for 2015. In late October in Memphis, Tennessee is the first one, which is going to be really, we hope, sort of drawing in groups from the Southeast. And then we have the great fortune of working with Jeff Morissette we just agreed to co-host one with the North Central Climate Science Center in Fort Collins, December 9th and 10th, so this coming December. And we are really hoping to draw groups in, especially from the Great Plains region. That's an area where we have not received very many proposals into our grant program, but also the Intermountain West and the Rockies region, where we have gotten more projects coming in from that region, but of course, being in Fort Collins, we will no doubt be addressing both of these geographies. So like I said, we'll be very excited to be able to work with the North Central Climate Science Center very closely on getting their help to provide us with climate projections for the region, but also to do the instructing and coaching with us. So again, just to sort of end with just a couple of parting thoughts on, again, some of these opportunities for partnering with the North Central Climate Science Center, or really with any of the regional climate science centers and other entities that are doing climate science research and also helping with decision support. Obviously, we'll be co-hosting this training session. I know that Jeff has talked about being interested in maybe doing other kinds of CSC-led trainings. I know you've already done some climate smart conservation trainings and adaptation vulnerability assessment trainings. So hopefully those will continue to be supporting groups as they try to develop projects that could be candidates for our grant program. Obviously, you all are doing scientific research, new research, but also science syntheses that can be really critical to informing on-the-ground projects in this region. So I look forward to seeing groups relying upon your science for their projects. To support or even help facilitate and lead adaptation planning in the region. Again, that's going to be a critical step towards the group being able to put together a strong proposal for the grant program. And I hope that the science centers can also help to provide a platform for communicating about the projects as they're underway and as they move forward, to be able to share what individuals are doing on small plots of ground with others who might be interested in considering some of those practices and adopting them more broadly. To find out more about the program, you can go to our WCSNorthAmerica.org website. You'll see at the top here a link to the Climate Adaptation Fund, and you can download things like our request for proposals, our guidance documents. You can see lists of funded projects. You can also see we have, I think, 6 films about some of the projects that we're supporting already. We'll eventually be posting details on the December training, and other kinds of information about the grant program can be found there. So with that, I'll wrap it up and list Darren Long, who's the director of the Climate Adaptation Fund program, as one of the primary contacts. I'm the senior science advisor for the grant program. You can contact either one of us if you want to learn more about the program or to use us as a sounding board to sort of vet whether projects you're involved in might be a good fit with the program. So I encourage folks to contact me or to contact Darren if you've got more questions. But I'm also happy if there is still time, Jeff, you can let me know to answer any questions if folks have them here on the call.
Yeah, why don't we take about 5 minutes if people have questions. There's a lot of good information and exciting opportunity, I think. So let's give at least 5 minutes for those.
So Jeff, are you taking questions?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right, Molly, hi. Thank you for this presentation. I'm Kevin Johnson with the Southern Rockies Landscape Conservation Cooperative. You mentioned that the grants are available for nonprofits. But where do tribes fit into that?
Yes, that's a great question, and I'm going to probably have to defer a confirmed answer to Darren. Darren's sort of more involved in some of those kinds of logistical details of the grant program. I think I'm not sure they can directly apply. In the past, we've gotten proposals that are proposing to do work in partnership with tribes, and usually there is, again, a sort of NGO that's actually the applicant with funding passing through to support the staff time of the tribal representatives that are part of the project to do, to do the contracting, to do the equipment, to do the sort of on-the-ground conservation work that's part of the project. So I'd have to confirm with Darren whether any tribal entities can actually directly apply to the grant program, but it may be a similar situation to state and federal agencies where they need to partner with an NGO.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, this is Allison Shipp. I'm with the USGS Southwest Region Office. And one of the things that you indicated is that you are looking occasionally at, was the decision that was made the right decision, so you're going back and doing some post-monitoring. What is the time frame for these types of projects, or are they applying for a second round to go back to look 5 years later to see if what they implemented worked?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and I can add a little bit to what I already said on that front too, a few more details. So, I mean, our grants are 2-year grants. So we are obviously, as I mentioned before, we are not fundamentally able to invest in the monitoring and evaluation work that needs to happen to really get at effectiveness. What we are trying to do, and again, one of the ways we're trying to catalyze some of these sort of best practices within these projects is we would at least want to hear from folks what their plan is. What would they do? Sort of if resources were available to them, how, what kind of baseline data are they? So our dollars are more likely to go towards collecting baseline data that could be used as the basis for effectiveness evaluations later on. And we're trying to encourage groups, this is not a sort of a formal mandate that groups have to do this, but we're trying to encourage them to at least have thought about the evaluation piece and to think about, well, what are the metrics we need to monitor? We ask them in their application about, what are some of the key indicators that you would monitor or that you're hoping to monitor as part of this project to get at effectiveness. So we ask them questions about that. We are trying to provide them with some resources on how to think about monitoring and evaluation in a climate change context. And so, right now it's more of an encouraging rather than a requiring for our program, but we're definitely thinking a lot about it. And Doris Duke Charitable Foundation right now is not interested in investing heavily in the monitoring and evaluation piece, but we're continuing to educate ourselves and to educate them about how, adaptation doesn't stop with deciding what seems like a good idea in the abstract or in kind of concept. We need to really follow up on whether the actions we're taking are having the intended effects or not, and if so, adjusting what we're doing. So I'd say we care a lot about it. We're not mandating anything in particular right now, and we're really just trying to help groups at least have a foundation as they move forward in their projects.
Thank you.
This is Jeff Morset. Just to add that I think, this is really an exciting opportunity, I think, to have this training December 9th and 10th. especially with respect to, I would say, the 2013 funded projects, management-focused projects, that had, sort of an action decision at the core of those funded works, so that, I think there's on the order of 6 to 10 groups go to the workshops. So, we could have, we could entertain small groups from each of the 3 2013 projects to think about taking the research that the North Central Climate Science Center has invested in. They've did the hard work to really get some scientific basis for some management actions, to think about then turning those into the actual actions. And then so the proposal or the group coming to that training session in December here in Fort Collins would be, I think, well poised to submit a proposal in early 2016. So I guess I would ask investigators, there's at least some people from each of the 3 groups on the call, to think about a nonprofit that you might want to work with that would be either a part of your team or could be brought in to attend that session and think about using some of that workshop and then maybe applying for that fund.
Yeah, and I'll just a couple really quick words about the training. We are able to offer it sort of free of charge in terms of there's no registration fee for participating in the training, because we're able to use funding from Doris Duke Charitable Foundation to cover that. But folks will need to cover their own travel and lodging to get to the training, but then the training itself will be offered for free.
And I would think that we might be able to help with that travel, especially if it's related to some of the projects that we're doing or important to the landscape conservation cooperatives or other stakeholders. We could iterate on that. Okay. Dennis is saying we might have about 10,000 in travel support. That should get anybody from our region that could get to Fort Collins, or quite a few people.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, well.
So yeah, you might want to wrap it up now, Jeff. I just want to encourage folks to feel free to contact me with any further questions about the program, or like I said, we're very available to, you may have a variety of projects you're working on, and if you want to sort of use this as a sounding board to feel out what might be the best fit with the grant program, we're always available for that. So please do contact me with any other questions.
Thank you very much, Molly. I thought it was great to hear, and it's an exciting opportunity. Yeah, you're free to, we're going to move on to sort of the round robin, checking in with the projects. You're free to stay on the call, of course, but I'm going to transfer control over here to the screen, and maybe we'll start with adaptation, and then go to impacts, and then climate. Try to go to the summary. I appreciate people filling out the spreadsheet. I see that we've got quite a bit of information as far as the upcoming meetings, upcoming products, and FSA needs. I would encourage the FSA folks to kind of sort through this, especially in details of what is needed. I think a very specific question came from the SIMSTAD project, looking to know from the climate FSA on year-to-year variability, but in the sake of kind of moving the meeting along, maybe and then sort of just FYI, I take and have a summary at the end of the worksheet, which does give each project. I'll try to slow down a little bit here. And at the monthly check-in, I update these to be, or we update these to be what was reported at this particular check-in. So you'll see the FSA needs are summarized over here. But why don't I just turn it over. I think Shannon is not on the call, but Dennis, I think you guys are starting, or Jill, they're starting the adaptation telecoms starting in September, and I don't know if there's anything else to report, and just maybe take 2 to 4 minutes, and then we'll go to the other 2 teams, and then maybe a round robin for any pressing issues.
Yeah, I think this is Dennis. Jill Lackett and I and Shannon McNeely are reestablishing the Adaptation Social Ecological Working Group or User Group webinars, and the first one will be September 8th, and we'll try to have these once a month, and we'll set that schedule up. But I think given the input and feedback that we got from the Open Science Conference that we see a lot of interesting activities. We're trying to get a mechanism of actually encouraging additional type of interactions related to both looking at adaptation activities and support and responding to climate change, as well as then looking at research on social ecological system analysis to various response strategies within our region and different types of natural resources that we're dealing with. Some of the efforts that Jeff and a number of people are looking at, with Joe Lackett, looking at the various toolkits available, looking at sort of the social science dimensions of those, and looking at how we can enhance the social ecological linkage to those. So that's
okay.
Report for now.
Good, and I think I got Arjun and Andy on. Andy, did a lot of the work on having a really, I think, a fantastic session at the Ecological Society of America meeting in the afternoon. So thanks to Andy for doing that. I thought it went really well. But let me hand it over to you guys for any other updates. I thought Andy and Arjun, maybe they've signed off.
Maybe they're muted?
I'm here.
I hear someone.
Oh, sorry. I was on mute. Andy here. So I was just saying, yeah, thanks, Jeff, and hello to everybody. And ask Arjun if maybe he could begin and I could fill in afterwards.
Okay. Currently, we are focusing the work on species distribution around North Central Climate Science Center domain. The current distribution of about 25 species was mapped, and we are looking for some other literatures for the species who has, which can be potential invaders in the future into the North Climate Science Center domain. After that, when we map all the current distribution of those around 30 species, we will definitely step ahead to modeling of those species in the future. And the land cover change manuscript is going back and forth between Dr. Hansen and me, and it is almost at the end. I mean, within a few weeks, we will finalize one manuscript. Yeah, that's all. And I'm coming to, hard coding for the SAM's training on 8 and 9.
Good.
Yeah, and just to a little context, the first three objectives of our project are first analyzing land use and land cover change across the domain, and then secondly, summarizing projected change in ecological processes like snow and runoff, and then thirdly, to do species distribution modeling of tree species. And so Arjun was just confirming that we've put most of our time into the land cover use change and have a solid report on that now, and we're revising it for publication. Regarding the third objective, tree species modeling, we've basically gotten data on, determined which tree species to include, and have downloaded the data for that. And Arjun is in the process of developing the predictor data set, and also will be attending the SOM training to get additional training in this type of modeling. And then we've been working with the NASA TOPS people to take to basically get data for the CSC domain from their ecosystem process projections and analyzing those for the domain. So those are the main activities, and then we had the pleasure of working with you all on submitting materials for the newsletter, for the summer newsletter. So that's more or less what we've been up to.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think the newsletter was the the impacts team, so that was good to see, and a lot of information there. One a question, Andy and Arjun, and maybe you've done this, I haven't tracked it that closely, but with that land cover analysis, I know you guys have done a lot, and Arjun kind of jumped in with both feet and dug into that. Has there been any interaction with any of the 8 management-focused teams, and maybe not all of them, but as far as maybe I don't know if the paper could fit a case study, or just it's another endeavor, a separate paper, or just kind of as those data sets then presumably become available, or we could share those with the groups. It might be we could tap into the 8 management-focused projects and see their kind of their use and the utility of those land cover products that you're doing.
Well, that's an interesting thought. So it sounds like you're suggesting maybe share the report with them and ask them if the analyses for their area make sense, but also ask them if any of the data or analyses would be of interest and use to them.
Yeah, something along those lines, and maybe that sounds like a good option. And maybe you throw it out, and there's I know maybe 8 teams would be a little overwhelming. You probably want to get this stuff out. So maybe if there's folks on the line that are interested in it, maybe they could communicate directly with you and Arjun and look into that.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way of thinking of a generalized primer for these different groups like we did with the climate, but I think with the landscape and land use, land cover, probably various aspects of understanding temporal changes that could be put into a sort of a summary type document for these different project areas.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a nice kind of product or service we could kind of take this to that next level.
Yeah, so just we basically did the analyses within these what we're calling these wildland-centered ecosystems. So these 9 sets of public lands and surrounded private lands that are focused on parks and national forests and tribal lands. So it's actually, it's a substantial effort to do new analyses for different polygons within the domain. And I think it'd be more efficient to first send them what we've done and let them let us know if they'd like more done or what they'd like done, rather than trying to cut out a new geography and redo the analyses.
Yeah, I think that that does seem efficient, makes sense. I know that when Arjun started, I thought we had provided polygons for each of the 8 projects. But I guess I'm not sure exactly what polygons were.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we never. We never said we were going to do the analyses for each project area, and again, we'd be happy to do whatever's needed, but we don't want to do stuff that's not needed. And until we get indication back from, like just for example, relative to the white bark pine project, this is really not relevant at all.
Right. So why don't we see what polygons you have cut out, and if there's any that overlap or could be, fully utilized by, and I think there are some that could be utilized by the projects, to start with what you have for sure.
And are you suggesting that all three foundational groups basically reconfigure all products for each foundational, each management-oriented study? I mean, that seems like a big departure from what we've talked about.
So I would go back to example like the climate primers that Marion has produced or worked on. Can be, is customized to a polygon and has been informed with work from the Park Service and John Gross's input, but then a lot from Joe and MTS that have kind of shaped the way those turned out. So what I would envision is maybe take the polygons that you have set out, the analysis, share it with any team that would possibly use them, and the existing polygon would coincide with the area where they're working. We learn from that and then explore if, Colin and Arjun or other staff here at the Climate Science Center could, and maybe work with TOPS or wherever those data sets are coming from to explore what we could do as a resource into the future for a land cover analysis type of, I guess, primer. Like instead of adding to the climate primers like a land cover primer. So I don't think I'm suggesting you change what was proposed to do, but we keep in mind how we would use that and where we turn it into products or services we could provide based on that research.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't know that climate primers were being produced for each of the 8 foundational management adaptation studies. Is that right, or who? Alternatively, that like our approach of focusing on these sets of public lands is an alternative geography relevant to stakeholders. So in other words, when we're doing the climate primers for the National Park Service, those are focused on individual parks, so that's an obvious geography of interest. What are the management-oriented units of interest within the domain that we want to shoot for?
Well, this is Colin. I think how we envision it is having a workflow or a toolbox or something that we can apply to different units as they come up, so that we're not necessarily calculating this for every possible polygon that might be of interest to anybody, but having kind of something ready to go so that we can generate this and maybe tune the output so that it's more meaningful for different projects for anyone that might need it. So I don't know if that's kind of what Jeff had in mind for the landscape metrics that you guys are generating.
Yeah, and I think it's not. I'm not sure if it's fully vetted in my mind or with everyone and the team and stakeholders, but I guess the thought was to at least to share what Arjun and Andy are doing with the land cover analysis with one or more of the management-focused projects where it makes sense with the existing polygon and see how that land cover can influence these projects. And then decide where we go from there. I think and what Colin said was sort of a logical, thing to explore.
That sounds great, and I like both. Sharing with those 8 projects, but then also us as a group thinking about for each of our types of products being able to reconfigure them into into a primer format for whatever geography is of interest to people. Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, this is Joe. My understanding was when I saw your picture of the regions, Andy, was that they do cover most of the projects. There is a region for every, or almost all of the funded projects. You pretty much filled up the domain, if I remember correctly, with your.
Yes. Yeah, that is true.
And so that it wouldn't be too hard to just say, oh, well, this region is the one that applies to this project, and we can give you a summary for that. Whereas the climate primers, we worked with, Imtiaz and I worked with with Colin and Marion to get them a little bit more, how do I say it, tuned for the kind of problems that we're going to be seeing in some of these regions, and to answer questions like, well, do you just show the tiny polygon, or do you show the region around them? Which I think really, for the tiny areas, we need to show the region around them. So yeah, it's a capability to do that. It's not like we are doing it as a product, and sending out in the email, here's your climate primer. But that could be done. I mean, we could get together and try and do sort of a climate ecological, two-pager on all of these things at some point.
Yeah, actually, the climate, the impact team analysis, it doesn't cover the sagebrush, only small portion of the sagebrush area covers, but for the other project, it covers most of the funded project.
Okay, so I don't know if there's an action, maybe Arjun or Andy. I don't know how you want to kind of, if there's any people on the call. All the projects are represented here. They could, if anybody wants to step up and look at that land cover analysis, I think that having at least one would be useful. I think 8 might be overwhelming, but maybe I'll let you guys sort out and vet who might be the most appropriate. I know that Ben's work is there, so I don't know if the Bolter project is convenient, but maybe you guys could take that offline.
Well, we'll just send a report to the PIs in each of those projects. With a letter saying if they'd like more information, we're happy to provide it.
That sounds perfect. And if you go to the spreadsheet, the monthly check-in, you can kind of cut and paste from that summary tab, and you'll get the email for all the funded investigators. So that's an easy way to do that.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Andy and Arjun. And in the interest of time, we'll move on to climate, but if I could ask to make it relatively quick, I guess we'll have the regional climate workshop. It's kind of I know you guys have been doing a lot of work on getting that together, and that will be just after our next monthly check-in, but on the 24th and 25th, but I'll open it up to Joe and Imtiaz if there's anything, if you could quickly report so we don't go too much over the hour.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. This is Imtiaz Rangwala. It's just great to hear Molly's talk earlier today. I think some great thinking there in terms of climate adaptation. And much I've involved on climate adaptation project, I feel that this is the right direction. So yeah, in the interest of time, I'll just hand it over to Candida, who will just talk briefly about the evapotranspiration research that we have started on our end here. So I'll give it to Candida.
Hi, everyone. So in order to address the goals of the foundational science team, the climate, and also our participation in the Wind River project, we're looking at, in order to understand the drought conditions, how they are expressed in simulations of future climate, we want to first understand, pinpoint the best way of detecting these drought conditions in the historical GCM simulations. So we're testing different formulations of evaporative demand or potential evapotranspiration, if you will, not just between those temperature-based formulations, but also the preferred physically based. And within the latter, we're looking at making a detailed assessment of the assumptions that go behind the physically based formulations. The most accepted is the Penman-Monteith as defined in the FAO 56 document, and also whether you take physically based model variables. So comparing how these different formulations are expressed in specific GCMs, we want to understand what are the differences, if any, in these in the present, and how we can eventually apply this to future climate analysis. And we're working on this initial analysis and hopes to present it at the AGU conference in December, so hopefully we'll have some products coming out soon.
And Joe, if you want to add something quickly?
Pardon me?
You have to add anything?
Well, I would like to add. So you mentioned that this focused invitation-only workshop on use of regional climate modeling is coming along. The planning is coming along quite well for that. I think we're quite set. Did you want to mention that the one person we could use one more person from a project who's actually an ecologist or involved in an ecological project to come and represent their needs to this group from the North Central sort of family here. So that would be a spot that we might have one open. Otherwise, we're pretty much full up with the capacity that we have to run that. Second thing is report on the Wind River. We did have a nice phone call with the Wind River. So the climate team and the Wind River Adaptation Project team had a very, very productive, I thought, initial phone call laying out some of the issues for the climate. We'll be working more closely with the team from the NDMC, the Drought Mitigation Center, and Mark Swoboda in particular to work on climate projections of some of these drought indices. That was actually a really encouraging call. We're going to probably set up a smaller call just between us, Mark and his team, and us, and Cody, and to actually lay out some of the more concrete aspects of what we're going to do for that. But it will involve looking at some of these drought indices, and also taking some of the sort of the timely work we're doing on El Nino effects and bringing it into their drought planning. At least trying to see if it has how it might fit into their drought planning work. Pardon me. And that's really all I have as an update on this for now. So we do have the connection with the Western Water Assessment and the snow workshop. There's a snow workshop up in Lander, Wyoming that's going to be attended by several people from the Wind River tribes and tribal management and others in the area. And we do have the snow monitoring workshop in Colorado in Broomfield coming up in September. I believe that one's getting full, if not already full, but very interesting for those who deal with the idea of what are the more modern or what emerging technologies are there for monitoring snowpack. So with that, I think that's it for me.
Great.
Pardon me.
Anything else, MTS?
No, I think Joe has covered all of the ground. So I'll leave it there, and we can fill other things the next call.
Again, I would ask the FSA leads to look at the spreadsheet where you got kind of comments or requests from the different management-funded projects. I would add the next monthly check-in will be the 4th Tuesday in September, so that's September 22nd. That'll be just the week before the regional, the climate modeling workshop that Joe and MTS mentioned. At that call, Shannon is going to give an overview of working with tribes. She has done some presentations like that in different parts and different conferences, parts of the country, and we thought it'd be good to bring it to our core team here. So she's going to be talking about that. And then I'd ask Joe and MTS maybe for the October monthly check-in, we could have a summary of that workshop that will be in September. It might be good to kind of share that. And then November on is open, and I think I'm starting to see quite a few of papers or activities coming out of the management focus project. So we probably have an opportunity to highlight some of that and showcase some of that on these monthly calls as that comes through. So I'll be asking or hitting people up for that in the next month or two to fill in from November on. But we're a little beyond an hour, sorry, and appreciate people hanging in there. Anything people want to throw out before we sign off? Dennis has something.
Just a bureaucratic issue that I'm dealing with, all these budget issues right now. I'm going to be sending around to all the PIs or the new reporting requirements. I've talked to some of you already about this, but I actually have a new modification that lays out the reporting requirements that you need to do in way of progress reports 60 days before the end of your fiscal budget year, plus the final technical report that's due 90 days after the end of the project. So they lay out the details of that. The other thing I've been dealing with, which is very I'm just kind of grabbing numbers out of the hat right now, but if you could prepare just a template of travel costs and expenses that I could just, if I get a request from USGS to say, justify the meetings and travel costs, rather than just making it up, which I do, I would like to have you guys provide me a template of what your travel costs for mileage, for airfare, whatever, just as a backup, so when I get something and they want it the next day, I can actually give it to them the next day with some evidence-based findings that provide me. So expect an email from me on this bureaucratic crap.
They're getting the notification from PDASH, and it's in the spreadsheet of which the annual reports are due and the final reports.
Okay.
Is that USGS or CSU's requirement?
This is all USGS stuff. So I want to make sure they get it.
What we do is, so PIs would have gotten a notice from the PDASH system. They let them know a certain amount of time before an annual report being due. And we also try to add it to this, where Leanne Wilson gets into the spreadsheet the week before the monthly check-in and highlights the data management plan and reporting. So I think they should be aware of it, but it doesn't hurt to remind, so we can stay in touch, but maybe we can coordinate a little on that.
Okay.
Anything else before we sign off? Okay, good. Well, I appreciate people hanging in there. We'll stop here and look forward to staying in touch, and if not, talking at the next month's check-in.